zarua latzadik, ul'ishrei lev simcha. O zarua latzadik, ul'ishrei lev simcha.
Welcome to Beth Israel Congregation of Kingston, Ontario. We are delighted that you have chosen to be with us as we spend this full day in prayer and introspection, of turning back into Teshuvah and resolving to do better in this coming year. We call this evening service Kol Nidre, after the first meditation that we will recite. It is less of a meditation and more of a legal formula, an odd choice to be the main focus of our service. Yet Kol Nidre's haunting tune has captured the hearts and emotions of generations of our people. Kol Nidre is the prayer of people not free to make their own decisions, people forced to say what they do not mean. In repeating this prayer, we identify with the agony of our forebears who had to say yes when they meant no. Kol Nidre is also a confession. We are all transgressors, all exiled from the highest we know, all in need of the healing of forgiveness and reconciliation. For what we have done, for what we may yet do, we ask pardon. For rash words, broken pledges, insincere assurances, and foolish promises, may we find forgiveness. We rise in front of the open ark and turn to page 204. Who can understand the source of our errors? Cleanse me of secret faults and restrain your servant from willful sins. May they not control me. Then shall I be innocent of wrongdoing, wholly clear of transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer.
Bishiva shel mala uvishiva shel mata al da'at hamakom ve'al da'at hakahal anu matirin lehitpalel havaryanim.
Kol Nidre, page 205.
Kol Nidre Vesarei Vacharamei Vekonamei Vechinuyei Vekinusei Ushevot Din Darna Udei Shtebana Uneharimna Vedasarna al nafshatana miyom kippurim ze ad yom kippurim haba Aleinu letova kulhom licharat hanavehon, kulehon yehon sheran. Shevitin, betelin umevutalin, lasherin velakayamin, nidrana. La nidre vesarana la esare ushevuatana la shevu. Kol Nidre vesarei v'charamei v'konamei v'chinuyei v'kinusei u'shevut darna udeish tebana udeacharimna vedasarna al nafshatana miyom kippurim ze ad yom kippurim haba Letova kulehon lecharat hanavehon kulehon yehon sheran shevitin betelin umevutalin lasherin velakayamin nidrana la nidre vesarana la esarei ushevuatana la shevu.
All vows, renunciations, bans, oaths, formulas of obligation, pledges and promises that we vow or promise to ourselves and to God from this Yom Kippur to the next, may it approach us for good, we hereby retract. May they all be undone, repealed, cancelled, voided, annulled, and regarded as neither valid nor binding. Our vows shall not be considered vows. Our renunciations shall not be considered renunciations, and our promises shall not be considered promises.
Veni salach lechol hadat b'nei Yisrael ולגר הגר בתוכם, כי לכל העם בשגגה.
The entire congregation of the people Israel shall be forgiven, as well as the stranger who dwells among them, for all have erred.
ויאמר אדוני, סלחתי כדבריך. ויאמר אדוני, סלחתי כדבריך. ויאמר אדוני, סלחתי כדבריך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
And as we return the Torah to the ark, we remain standing and turn to page 207 for Baruch Hu, the call to prayer.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed.
You may be seated, and we continue praying together in the Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chokhmah poteach sha'arim, uvitvuna meshane itim, umachalif et hazmanim, umesader et hakochavim, b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono. Bore yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. Uma'avir yom umevi layla, uma'avdil bein yom uvein layla, Adonai tzvaot shemo. El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. Page 208, Ahavat Olam.
Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael, Amcha v'ta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadeta. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu, b'shochveinu v'kumeinu, nasiach b'chokecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ואהבת תציר ממנו לעולמים. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Baruch Shem kevod malchuto leolam vaed.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lebavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha ve'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha ve'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך.
Adonai Elohechem hem hefna kol zo v'kayem aleinu. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליכם, משה אמרם ובני ישראל לך אנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה מרים. זה לי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פדרנו את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
We turn to page 211 for Hashkivenu.
Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu, לשלום. והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ותקננו בעצה טובה מלפניך, והושיענו למען שמך. והגן בעדנו, והסר מעלינו אויב ודבר, דבר וחרב, ורעב ויגון, ובצל כנפיך תסתירנו, כי אל שומרנו מצילנו אתה. אל מלך חנון ורחום אתה, ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום. מעתה ועד עולם, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו, ועל כל עמו ישראל, ועל ירושלים.
We rise as we turn to page 212.
כי ביום הזה יכפר עליכם, לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם. לפני אדוני, לפני אדוני, תטהרו, תטהרו, תטהרו. יתגדל ויתגדל שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיידך בית ישראל, בגלח ובזמן קריב, והיא מרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם המאמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריאו אמן. לעילה לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה דחושבתתה ונחמתה, תמירן בעלמא, והיא מרו אמן.
We now take some time to pray the Amidah silently. This is from page 213 through page 221. We turn to page 223 for the Sleichot prayers as we open the ark.
Yada 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 dum. Yada 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 Yale tachanunenu merem Vayavo Shabbatenu mi boker Yada da da yare rinunenu hararev Yada da da yada yada da da yada yada da da yada yada da 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 Yale kolinamenu Yale ein katenu merem Vayavo elecha mi boker Yadai dai dai veyadai eleinu adarev Yada da da yada yada da da yada yada da da yada da 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 da.
We can continue on page 227.
Ki hine kach omer biyad hayotzer ברצותו מרחיב וברצותו מקצר כן אנחנו בידך חסד נוצר לברית הבית אל תפן ליצר כי נקווין ביום הזה כי הנה ככסף ביד הצורף ברצותו משגב וברצותו מצרב כן אנחנו בידך ממציץ למזור תרב לברית הבית ואל תפן ליצר.
We continue on page 232.
El melech yeshiva El horeit halanu lomar 13 חלנו היום ברית 13 כמו שהודעת לעניו מקדם כמו שכתוב וירד אדוני בעיניי יצב עמו שם ויקרא בשם אדוני, ויאמר אדוני על פניו, ויקרא, אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, ערך אפיים, ורב חסד ואמת, נושא חסד לאלפים, נושא ההון ופשע, והטהר ונקה. וסלחת לעוננו חטאתנו חטאנו. סלח לנו אבינו כי חטאנו, מחל לנו מלכנו כי פשענו, כי אתה אדוני טוב וסלח, ורב חסד לכל קוראיך.
Page 233. Grant atonement and purify us this day, as it is written in the Torah. For on this day atonement shall be made for you to purify you from all your transgressions. In the presence of Adonai you shall be pure. Bring us to your holy mountain and make us joyful in your house of prayer, as Isaiah prophesied. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people.
Shema Koleinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Hu Sever Rachem Aleinu, Aleinu. וקבל ברחמים, ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו. השיבנו אדוני אליך, השיבנו אליך ונשובה, חדש ימינו, ימינו כקדם. אל תשליכנו, אל תשליכנו לעת זקנו, כי כלות כוחנו. Shema Koleinu, Adonai Eloheinu, Hu Sever Rachem Aleinu, Aleinu. וקבל ברחמים, ברחמים וברצון את תפילתנו.
We close the ark now, and you may be seated. And we turn to page 234. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, slach lanu, mechal lanu, kaper lanu.
Ki anu amecha ve'ata Eloheinu, anu vanecha ve'ata Avinu, anu avadecha ve'ata Adonenu, anu kehalecha ve'ata chelkeinu, anu nachlatecha ve'ata goralenu, atnu sonecha ve'ata ro'enu, anu charmecha ve'ata nodrenu, anu ve'ulatecha ve'ata yotzreinu, anu rayatecha ve'ata dodenu, anu sgulatecha ve'ata krovenu, anu amecha ve'ata malkeinu, anu mamirecha ve'ata ma'amirenu.
We rise as we turn to page 235 for the Confession, Ashamnu.
Ay, 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 Ashamnu,
Ashamnu,
Bagadnu,
Bagadnu,
Gazalnu,
Gazalnu,
Dibarnu dofi,
Dibarnu dofi,
ay, 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 Avinu,
Avinu,
Vehirshanu,
Vehirshanu,
Zadnu,
Zadnu,
Hamasnu,
Hamasnu,
Tafalnu shaker,
Tafalnu shaker,
ay, 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 Ya'atzanura,
Ya'atzanura,
Gizavnu,
Gizavnu,
Latznu,
Latznu,
Maradnu,
Maradnu,
Niatznu,
Niatznu,
Sararnu,
Sararnu,
Avinu,
Avinu,
Ashanu,
Ashanu,
Sararnu,
Sararnu,
Kishinu Horef,
Kishinu Horef,
ay, 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 Rashanu,
Rashanu,
Shichatanu,
Shichatnu,
Tiavnu,
Tiavnu,
Tahinu,
Tahinu,
Titanu.
Titanu. We have turned from your goodly laws and commandments, but it has not profited us. Surely you are in the right with respect to all that comes upon us, for you have acted faithfully, but we have been in the wrong. We continue on page 237.
אחרי שקטנו לפניך ביצר הרע ואחרי שכן לפניך יודעים ובלא יודעים, והל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחל לנו, כפר לנו. אחרי שחטאנו לפניך אחרי שלפניך בעיניים רמו, ואחרי שקטנו לפניך בעזות מצח, והל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחל לנו, כפר לנו. אחרי שחטאנו לפניך בגדול, ואחרי שקטנו לפניך אחרי שקטנו לפניך בתשומת יד, אחרי שקטנו לפניך במיון לבב, והל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחל לנו, כפר לנו. ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו מחל לנו, כפר לנו.
We open the ark now and turn to page 243 for Avinu Malkeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu ta lefanecha, Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, chazirenu בתשובה שלמך לפניך.
Avinu Malkeinu, chazirenu בתשובה שלמך לפניך.
Avinu Malkeinu, שלח רפואה שלמה לחולי עמך.
Avinu Malkeinu, שלח רפואה שלמה לחולי עמך.
Avinu Malkeinu, זכרנו בזיכרון טוב לפניך.
Avinu Malkeinu, זכרנו בזיכרון טוב לפניך.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר חיים טובים.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר חיים טובים.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבים בספר גאולה וישועה.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר גאולה וישועה.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבים בספר פרנסה וכלכלה.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר פרנסה וכלכלה.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר זכויות.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר זכויות.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבים בספר סליחה ומחילה.
Avinu Malkeinu, כותבנו בספר סליחה ומחילה.
Avinu Malkeinu, עשה לנו ישוע בקרוב. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu v'aneinu, ki ein manu masim. Asei manu tzedaka v'chesed. Asei manu tzedaka v'chesed ve'oshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Avinu Malkeinu, Hanenu, Hanenu, Ki ein banu maasim, Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed, Aseh imanu, tzedaka v'chesed, ve'oshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu.
Remaining standing, we turn to page 245 for Kaddish Shalem.
Yitkadal veyitkada shemei Rabba, Amen. Be'alema divrach kirutei ve'malich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'chayedecho Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'vizman kari ve'imeru, ve'imeru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach leolam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh ve'yitadar ve'yithalel ve'yitalash medhura shabrichu leile laila mikol birchata ve'shirata tushbechata ve'nechemata adamiran ve'alma ve'imeru. Amen. Titkabal slo tehon v'tehon dechol Yisrael kadam v'hon divishmaya ve'imeru. Amen. Yehei shlam Rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'kol Yisrael ve'imeru ve'imeru. Amen. Ose shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen.
We turn now to Aleinu on page 246.
Aleinu leshabeach al Adon hakol, latet gedula leotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpechot האדמה, שלא שמחכנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל עמונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקר ובשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגבהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו. ידעת היום והשבות על לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מן תחת אין עוד, אין עוד. ככתוב בתורתך אדוני מלוך לעולם עבד. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד. ושמו אחד.
Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people and of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. Especially remembered in our congregation this day is Herbert Coven. If there are any other names to add to our list from those present here in our minyan, please speak them aloud. And all those at home, if you are saying Kaddish for someone, please join me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi.
Amen.
V'alma divra chirutei v'amlich malchutei. V'chayechon uv'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha brichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata. Ta'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the heavens cause peace to descend on us, on all Israel and all the world, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Before we conclude with our closing song of Adon Olam, which is on page 249, you can get ready now. I'd just like to thank everyone who helped us with tonight's service. To David Kogan, thank you for being our ark opener, and all of our minyan who has assembled here. We have assembled a minyan here in the studio so that we can say the prayers as a minyan, and those of you watching at home can have it count for you. So we're trying as hard under these circumstances to make it as authentic and meaningful an experience as possible, and we do hope that you're feeling that way joining us from home. Tomorrow morning, we will convene here on TV and online and in our studio with our minyan at 9:30 a.m. That will be our morning service, which includes Yisker. And after that, we'll have a short break and come back for our family service at 4 o'clock. It's a fun service that's definitely geared towards the children, but it is really fun and engaging for all ages, and I think that you'll enjoy it. I know I'm still singing a lot of the songs for the rest of the day. Thank you, Cantor. And it's a great experience with a Torah reading and a creative telling of the story of Jonah. So please join us for that. And then at 5:30, again, here through this medium, we will have our Nila service. That is the concluding service. However, then we will take a break, and you can have a choice for how you would like to view and participate in the actual conclusion of the day of Havdalah and the shofar blasts. So the choices are, you can be here on TV or on YouTube with us. You'll find the links on our website, kingston-bethisrael.ca, and at the appropriate time, which if you're in Kingston will be around 7:25. You can watch that, and so that the shofar will be blown on time for us here at 7:35. Or you can meet us down at the Newlands Pavilion near Murney Tower by Lake Ontario for an in-person 7:25 Havdalah followed by shofar. And if you are a shofar blower, bring your shofar. We'll have a chorus of shofarot blown over the water as the sun sets, and we conclude our day together and have a little break fast nibble together as well. Socially distanced, of course. Bring your masks and stay in your bubbles. We need to stay safe. So with that, and one more thing, if you care to stay on after we sing our closing song of Adon Olam, you will be able to hear my sermon that I've prepared for this holiday, for this day of Yom Kippur. It will run directly after the conclusion of this service, or you can, again, go to our website and click on my face there, and you will be linked to the sermon, and so you can watch it at your leisure. Page 249, we conclude with Adon Olam.
Adon Olam asher malach בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל הזר מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל הזר מלך שמו נקרא והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל הזר מלך שמו נקרא והוא אלי והגולי וסוחב לי בצרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום אקרא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל הזר מלך שמו נקרא בידו הפקיד רוחי בעת תשען והיראה ועם רוחי גוויעתי אדוני לי ולא ירא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא וחפצו כל הזר מלך שמו נקרא.
Gamar Chatima Tova. Recently, I've been thinking about a man I used to know. I wouldn't call him a friend, though we were friendly. I suppose he was my teacher, because I learned a lot from him, but not in a formal class setting. When I was an assistant rabbi in Minnesota, my senior rabbi told me to invite this man, Marv Davidov, to the class to speak with the grade 10 students. He was a professor at the University of St. Thomas, but he was not your typical professor. He had long disheveled hair, wore jeans, spoke with a scruffy voice, and very informally, the occasional curse word peppering his speech. I didn't really understand why he was appropriate to speak to our students, and then I heard his story. After serving many years in the Army, Marv attended the University of Minnesota, where he joined the Student Peace Union and began picketing local Woolworth stores in support of racial integration. The 60s were about to happen. He soon found himself joining the Freedom Riders, a movement to protest segregation in the South. In the spring of 1961, he and 6 other white-skinned Minnesotans boarded a bus to Jackson, Mississippi. When they arrived at the Jackson Greyhound station, the group defiantly violated a Jim Crow law by walking into what was called the Negro waiting room. They were arrested, convicted, and spent 45 days with other Freedom Riders in a Mississippi state prison. It was one of more than 50 arrests Davidov eventually racked up during nearly 6 decades of nonviolent civil disobedience. He eventually became an adjunct professor in the Peace Studies Department at the University of St. Thomas, teaching what he called active nonviolence. When he spoke to my students, Marv would tell them about the adventures he had standing up for equal rights for Black Americans. When he spoke to my students, as opposed to his students at St. Thomas, he spoke as a Jew. He was not an observant Jew by any means, but his life was dedicated to living out his Jewish values. Marv lived out the commandments to love your neighbor, not to stand idly by while your neighbor bleeds. He believed in the all-encompassing justice, justice shall you pursue, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Marv died in 2012 at the age of 81. I wonder what he would say about the state of race politics, policies, and demonstrations today. I think he'd be saddened that not enough has changed since the 60s. But he'd be heartened to see that the conversation is once again moving to the forefront of people's consciousness, and encouraged that people are taking to the streets to make their voices heard. Ever since the killing of George Floyd, the conversation about race has taken center stage. Rightly so. What I hear in my circles is a questioning of what the Jewish role is in the conversation. Jews come in all colors. Some identify more directly with the experience of black and brown citizens. Some of us, though we might have white skin, don't identify as white. We experience discrimination as well, albeit in different ways from our neighbors of color. And what of the Black Lives Matter movement? Should Jews be involved? How did standing up for the freedom of and equality of others become so politically charged? In an article for the online magazine Jewish Currents, Anthony Russell, an African-American Yiddish musician, writes about the difficulty in translating the phrase Black Lives Matter to Yiddish. He points out that Yiddish has often been looked at as symbolic of authentic Jewishness, and at the same time has spoken out about blackness from the outside. He writes, right away, well-meaning attempts at translation featuring the word schwarze gave me pause. Though it has historical and literary precedent in the Yiddish language for the respectable discussion of black people, it also has a parallel history of pejorative use as a racial slur in American Yiddish. Though some people do not use that word as pejorative, it carries so much baggage. Russell suggests writing the phrase Black Lives Matter in Yiddish characters, rendering it Black Lives Matter, recognizing that this is a notion outside of Yiddish that requires and demands respect and seriousness from the inside. This discussion resonates with me. Our community needs to reckon with its historic racism and also celebrate its support of diversity and civil rights. At the same time, we must give people of color the respect they are due today. We have a history in Canada of white Jews discriminating against black people. We know there were Jewish slave owners and traders in the US, and there were likely in Canada as well when it was legal. Many of us have experienced grandparents referring to black people in derogatory ways. I am embarrassed to admit that I heard my own grandparents refer to black people usually using schwarze as a put-down, one that has the same force as the N-word in English. I'm not so sure they felt as negatively towards people of color as their tone implied. It was the language of the day, but that is no excuse. Sadly, the feeling of the day was one in which people of color were seen as less than, and whites had the right to discriminate, just like everyone else. White Jews, wanting to assimilate into Canadian culture and not be deemed greenies, joined in with anti-black discrimination. Historically, our two communities have traveled parallel roads, but rarely did the roads meet. Just as black people were restricted from living in certain neighborhoods, attending universities, and renting cottages, so were Jews. There were quotas on medical schools and law schools, and restrictions in pool halls and dance clubs. A sign at the beaches in downtown Toronto read, "No Jews or dogs allowed." Our communities were victims of the same discrimination, but we did not see an avenue where we could come together. Maybe this was due to our own prejudices. There were a couple of times, however, when we did come together. Ontario had restrictive land covenants, which gave landowners the right not to sell to Jews, black people, or Asiatics without penalty. This was one of the first times that people from the Jewish and black communities came together. The Workers' Education Association joined with lawyers for the Canadian Jewish Congress to strike down these restrictive land covenants. The case was heard in 1945 and started a 5-year period during which Canadian courts ultimately banned racially motivated riders on land deals. Nevertheless, bigotry persisted for years in rental markets, recreation areas, and private members' clubs. On a legal and practical level, this is an example of what can happen when minority groups come together with one voice. The Human Rights Commission, established in 1961, can be seen as a result of this work. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Sadly, this didn't last long. After this period, the Black and Jewish communities largely returned to their parallel roads. That is, until our shared enemies confronted us with the development of the Heritage Front. This insidious group came to Queens in the early 90s. I remember being a student here at the time and editing an edition of the Queens Journal dealing with racism. We brought in Bernie Farber from the Canadian Jewish Congress to talk to a group of white Jews, white non-Jews, Black students, and other anti-racism activists. The talk was effective. Mr. Farber's words helped convince one of the biggest recruiters for the Heritage Front, Elizabeth Moore, that she was in the wrong. She soon left the group and became an outspoken anti-racism advocate. Young white Jews and Black students came together with other young anti-racists to put down the Heritage Front. We worked together and achieved great things. We can and need to do that today. But I am hearing ambivalence. Black Lives Matter has exploded onto the scene and elevated the conversation. Often when I bring this up with other Jews, I find it easily dismissed. Black Lives Matter is anti-Semitic, they tell me. They support BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions on Israel. So let me clear this up. Black Lives Matter is not a racist organization. In fact, it is not an organization at all. It is an idea, a value, a movement. Black Lives Matter originated as a hashtag in 2013 after the killing of an unarmed African-American teenager named Trayvon Martin. It is a movement composed of entities at the local, national, and international levels. The Black Lives Matter movement is purposely decentralized, emphasizing the importance of the idea itself. Among the prominent entities working to end systemic racism and white supremacy in the United States is an organization named the Movement for Black Lives. As with the many Jewish communal organizations that exist, each entity has its own base of support with some overlap, and none speaks for the movement overall. It is the Movement for Black Lives platform that singled out Israel and expressed a deeply anti-Zionist policy brief, which put forth an ahistorical and lopsided version of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The platform was immediately met with widespread condemnation from the Jewish community. Even those who are deeply critical of the Israeli government felt the platform had gone far too far, and when they spoke up about it, the movement's leaders completely dismissed their concerns in a way that left lasting pain and anger. Ever since, the conversation on the relationship between supporting racial justice, Black Lives Matter, and support for Israel has remained explosive. Carly Pildes, writing for The Forward, reports, "I have heard from countless people that they feel they are in an impossible moral quandary, forced to choose between their love of Israel and the fight for justice for Black Americans, including their neighbors, friends, and family. Others expressed rage at the idea that any Jew or any person, for that matter, could have any doubts at this moment that they must open their wallets, put on their sneakers, and fight for justice. And many felt caught between these positions, torn in two. This one organization, Movement for Black Lives, does not speak for the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole, just as the JDL does not speak for all Jews. This is possibly confusing for Jews who are used to a hierarchical structure in our organizations rather than a bottom-up grassroots movement like the Black Lives Matter movement. The fact is, we can disagree with the position of a specific organization, such as the Movement for Black Lives platform, and still maintain our full commitment to the fundamental principle that Black lives matter, and to working to end systemic racism and white supremacy. I believe that we should. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. In Canada, though in recent years Jewish communities had strayed from supporting other minority groups, there has been an explosion of concern, mostly from conservative and reform congregations. we are finally beginning to discuss the elephant in the room, that is anti-Black racism. This time, we're not just talking about protecting each other in a practical way, but we are getting to the systemic issues around race and discrimination. There is a willingness now to come together, not just for self-preservation, but for understanding. We have to make that work. A singular group's anti-Zionist stance should not keep us from engaging in the important and necessary work of being allies and warriors for equality. Just think of Israel as an example. Israel sends doctors, nurses, and surgical teams into war zones to help people, regardless of their politics. They don't first ask the survivor of the explosion in Lebanon or the typhoon in the Philippines whether they support BDS. They just save lives. They bring children from the West Bank and Gaza into Israel to receive life-saving heart operations. They don't ask if they're related to any suicide bombers. They save lives, period. We must rise above our politics and come together in our shared humanity. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. We need to stop the excuses and do the work. We need to stop justifications for racism. We need to end hollow retorts like all lives matter. Yes, of course, all lives matter. Nobody is saying that only Black lives matter. Just like saying save the whales doesn't mean to heck with the birds and other animals. It means that the whales are endangered right now and need our care and support. Black Lives Matter means that Black lives are in harm's way right now in ways that other lives are not, and they need our care and support. I also hear, I don't see color. But that is unhelpful thinking, especially for white people, white Jews, because we too are members of a minority group that has and does experience discrimination and danger. We need to see color and make sure that when we see or hear anything hurtful targeting a person of color, we speak up and act. It's no longer enough to passively not be racist. We must actively be anti-racist. We need to see color and appreciate the history, the pain, and day-to-day prejudices that people of color experience. And when we see it, we need to use our voice and our privilege to make a difference. In much the same way, I want to be seen as Jewish, not just some other white woman. I'm not just the same as everybody else, and I'm proud of that. If or when someone expresses an anti-Jewish view, I want my non-Jewish allies to see me and speak up for me too. People of color are proud, just as we Jews are proud of our heritage, history, and people. We need to see each other's colors and differences and respectfully acknowledge that we have and do walk different roads. Finally, we need to defer to people of color to speak about racial justice and the experience of being a visible minority, just as we expect others to defer to us to define anti-Semitism. Part of allowing people of color the space to do this means that we need to see and own our prejudices, past and present. We need to acknowledge the pain felt by a Jew of color when she enters our synagogue and is asked if she's the kitchen help. We need to own the pain that we cause when we question a person of color at our door in ways that we would not question a white visitor. We still have a lot of work to do. Our tradition teaches, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, it is not your responsibility to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. May we, as Jews, join together with communities of color and other anti-racists to work for a better, more just, safer, more open society for all of us. Let us live out our Jewish values and put them into action. Then I have no doubt that my friend Marv will be smiling down on us, and he will know that his legacy of justice and peace continues. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.
Ya lai lai lai, ya lai lai lai, ya lai lai lai.